"There's nothing left, Neil." That is what my older brother Craig said to me, 3 days after we buried our father, standing in the kitchen of the house we grew up in, holding a thin folder of numbers he swore was the whole truth. "Dad died with almost nothing," he said. "After his debts and the funeral, there's barely anything to split, a few $1,000s each if we're lucky." He said it with a sad, practiced sigh, the sigh of a man delivering hard news he wished he did not have to deliver. And standing there in my grief, in the kitchen where our mother used to make Sunday breakfast, I almost believed him. My father, a lifetime of work, and nothing left but a few $1,000s and some debts. It did not feel right. But Craig was the executor. Craig had the papers. Craig was the responsible older brother who handled things, and I was just the grieving younger son who trusted his family. For about 2 weeks I believed my brother, and then I remembered something about our father that Craig had forgotten, and everything changed. Before I tell you how I caught my brother in the biggest lie of his life, let me ask you something. If you are new here, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel more than you know. And do me a favor, right now drop a comment and tell me where in the world you are watching from and what time it is where you are, because I read every single one of them, and I love seeing how far these stories reach. Now, here is the one thing my brother Craig did not know when he stood in that kitchen and told me our father died with nothing. Our father, Leonard Osborne, was the single most careful, organized, buttoned-up man who ever lived. A man who documented everything, insured everything, and never in his life let a valuable thing go untracked. And years before he died, Dad had done one quiet, ordinary, responsible thing that Craig never thought about even once, a thing that created, without either of us realizing it, a complete itemized, professionally appraised third-party list of every valuable thing our father owned, sitting in a file, dated and stamped and impossible to argue with. Craig thought he could tell me the estate was worthless because Craig controlled the estate's records. He forgot that our careful father had left a record of his own, in the hands of someone Craig did not control at all, and the day I remembered that record was the day my brother's whole scheme began to come apart. Now let me take you back to the beginning, to our father, and to the 2 very different sons he raised. I grew up in a town called Rensselaer, about 9,000 people, in the kind of place where a man's reputation is built over a lifetime and known to everybody. My father worked 41 years as the parts and service manager at the same farm equipment dealership, a steady, respected, meticulous man, and my mother taught piano until she passed when Craig and I were in our 20s. We were not wealthy, but my father was the kind of man who, on a modest income, over a lifetime, through relentless carefulness and saving and good sense, quietly built up more than anyone would have guessed, because he never wasted a dollar and never lost track of one either. Dad balanced his checkbook to the penny. He kept every receipt. He filed every warranty. He was, in the truest sense, a man of records, and I used to tease him about it. All those neat files and labeled boxes, and he would say, "Neil, someday all this careful paper is going to matter, and you'll be glad one of us kept it." He had no idea how right he would turn out to be, or that it would be his own son the paper protected us from. Let me tell you how careful my father actually was, because it is the whole hinge of this story. This was a man who kept the receipt for every appliance he ever bought, in a folder labeled by year, so that if anything failed under warranty, he could put his hand on the proof in 30 seconds. This was a man who wrote down the mileage every time he changed the oil in his truck, in a little notebook in the glove box, going back decades. He balanced his checkbook every Sunday evening at the kitchen table to the penny, the way other men say their prayers, and if it was off by a nickel, he would find that nickel if it took him an hour. Not because the nickel mattered, but because being right mattered. As a boy, I found it maddening, all that fuss over paper. As a man, I came to understand it was not fussiness at all. It was a kind of integrity, a belief that a life should be accountable, that a man should be able to show his work, that the truth of what you have and what you have done should be written down somewhere honest. My father did not keep records because he was suspicious of anyone. He kept them because he was an honest man, and honest men leave a clear trail. It never once occurred to him that the clear trail he left out of sheer honesty would one day be the net that caught his own dishonest son. And there is a terrible poetry in that. That Craig was undone not by our father's suspicion, which our father never had, but by our father's honesty, which our father had in abundance. My father had two loves outside his family, and they matter to this story, so let me tell you about them. The first was his coin collection, which he had built over 50 years starting as a boy, a serious collection of rare and valuable coins that he kept in a safe and knew the value of down to the dollar. Because of course he did. I have a memory of those coins that I hold close. When I was maybe 10, my father took me down to the basement one Sunday and opened the safe and showed me the collection tray by tray, and it was not the money he talked about, though he knew every value. It was the stories. This one, he said, holding up a worn silver dollar. My own father gave me when I was younger than you. It was the first one. That's where it started. This one I found in a shop in another state on my honeymoon with your mother. She picked it out. This one took me 11 years to track down. Each coin to my father was not a dollar amount. It was a chapter, a memory, a piece of his life pressed into metal, and he was showing them to me, I understand now, because he was beginning to hand them down, to make them mean something to the next Osborne. He told me that night that a collection is not really about the things. It is about the patience and the love that gathered them, the 50 years of a man paying attention. When Craig sold those coins off in the dark after the funeral, he thought he was liquidating an asset. He had no idea, or did not care, that he was scattering 50 years of our father's memories to strangers. Our honeymoon coin, the first silver dollar, the one that took 11 years. All of it gone for cash, treated as nothing but weight and metal. And when I got them back, some of them, through the accounting the court forced, I sat with those trays the way my father and I had sat with them when I was 10, and I put my hand on the honeymoon coin, and I understood that Craig had never once in his whole life seen the difference between the price of a thing and the meaning of it. My father spent his life gathering meaning. Craig spent one dark week converting it to cash. That difference is the whole story of the two sons my father raised. The second was his tools and his old truck, a beautifully restored classic pickup he had spent 20 years bringing back to life in the garage, worth a great deal to the right buyer. And there was one more thing, smaller but more precious than any of it, my grandfather's gold pocket watch, a family heirloom passed down 3 generations, that my father had always said would come to my son, his first grandson, when the time came. These were not just possessions, they were my father's life's passions, the coins and the truck and the watch. And everyone in the family knew what they were and roughly what they were worth. Everyone. Including Craig. Especially Craig. I want to tell you about the watch in particular, because of everything in this story. The watch is the thing that matters most to me, and it is the thing that shows you who Craig really became. My grandfather carried that gold pocket watch through the war and home again, and he gave it to my father on my father's wedding day. And my father wore it on every important day of his life, and when my son was born, my father held that watch up in the hospital and said, "This is his. When he's grown, this goes to the boy, 3 generations and now a 4th. He said it in front of the whole family more than once over the years, so there was never any doubt, never any ambiguity. It was as clear as a thing can be. The watch goes to my son. Craig was standing right there the last time my father said it. Craig heard it as clearly as I did. And so when I tell you that Craig, in that raw window after the funeral, took my grandfather's watch out of my father's things and hid it, and then stood in a courtroom and claimed he did not know where it was, you understand that he was not just stealing a valuable object. He was stealing something my father had promised aloud to a child, something sacred, 3 generations of our family in a small, heavy piece of gold, and he was lying about it under oath. There are degrees of theft, and the watch was the one that told me my brother was fully gone. Craig is 3 years older than me, and I have to be fair to him even now, because a story like this is worthless if I make my brother a monster from the start. He was not always this. But Craig had always been the one who was a little too interested in what things cost, a little too quick to calculate, a little too willing to bend a rule if he thought no one was measuring. He had money troubles as an adult, business ventures that did not pan out, a lifestyle a bit beyond what he could afford, and a way of always seeming to need just a little more than he had. I did not think much of it over the years. He was my brother. But looking back, I can see now that when our father died and Craig, the older son, became the executor of the estate, A door opened in front of a man who had spent his whole life wishing for just a little more, and Craig walked right through it. Because here is what I did not understand, standing in that kitchen believing his sad sigh. Between our father's death and that conversation, Craig had been alone with the estate. As executor, he had access to everything: the accounts, the safe, the house, the garage. Before any formal inventory was taken, before I or anyone else had eyes on what was really there, and Craig had used that window, that private time with our father's life's work, to do something I still can barely believe my own brother did. He looted it. Quietly, before anyone was watching, he emptied accounts, and he took the coin collection, and he arranged to sell the classic truck, and he took my grandfather's pocket watch, the watch meant for my son, and he took the valuable tools, and then he assembled a folder of numbers that told a story of an estate with almost nothing in it, because he had already removed almost everything of value before the counting ever started. He was not just going to take more than his share, he was going to take nearly all of it, and tell me, and the world, that it had never existed, that our careful, hard-working father had somehow died with nothing but debts. He was going to steal our father's legacy and slander our father's memory in the same move. And for about 2 weeks, God help me, I believed him. I have thought a great deal since about how Craig became a man who could do this, because he was not born one, and I knew him as a boy who was decent enough. But money, or the lack of it, works on some men like water on soft rock, wearing away a little more of them every year. And Craig had spent his whole adult life just slightly underwater, always one deal away from being fine, always with a lifestyle a size too big for his income, always borrowing against a future that never quite arrived. He had a way of talking about money that I noticed even as a young man, a hunger in it, a sense that everyone else had gotten a fairer share than he had. When our mother passed years before, I remember Craig being oddly focused on her small things, her jewelry, what it might be worth, at a time when I could think of nothing but that she was gone. I did not let myself see it clearly then, but the pattern was there for decades, the slow erosion, the growing sense in Craig that he was owed, that the world had shorted him, that if an opportunity ever came to finally get what he deserved, he would be a fool not to take it. And then our father died, and Craig became the executor, alone with a lifetime of carefully accumulated value, and a family too broken by grief to be watching, and the erosion finally reached the core. The opportunity he had been waiting for his whole life had arrived, and it was our father's estate, and Craig took it. I want to be honest about those 2 weeks, because the grief is the thing that makes this kind of betrayal possible, and these stories skip it. I had just lost my father. I was hollowed out. And when you are hollowed out with grief, you do not have the strength to suspect your own brother of a crime. You barely have the strength to make coffee. Craig counted on that. That is why men who loot estates do it in the raw window right after the death, because the family is too shattered to be watching, too deep in mourning to be counting, too trusting in the middle of a funeral to imagine that one of their own is robbing the body before it is even cold. I accepted the sad sigh. I accepted the thin folder. I even, God forgive me, felt sorry for Craig having to be the one to manage all this awful business. For 2 weeks I mourned my father and believed my brother, and Craig, I am sure, thought it was done, thought I would take my few $1,000s and my grief and never look closer. I'm not proud of those 2 weeks, but I will not hide them, because if you are ever in this position, I need you to understand how easy it is to be fooled by someone you love in the days after a death. Grief is not just sadness. Grief is a kind of concussion. It slows your thoughts, it dulls your instincts, it makes the simplest tasks feel like moving through deep water. In those 2 weeks I could barely remember to eat. I would start a sentence and lose it halfway through. I cried at commercials, and in that state, the idea of sitting down and coldly auditing my dead father's estate, of suspecting my own grieving brother of a crime, was not just difficult, it was unthinkable. It was more than my broken mind could hold. Craig knew that, whether he planned it coldly or simply understood it by instinct. He knew that the window right after the funeral was the one window in which I would never be watching, would never be counting, would accept a sad sigh and a thin folder, because suspicion requires a strength that grief takes away. That is the quiet evil of robbing an estate. You do it while the family is on its knees. You count on the love and the loss to blind them. And it works. It nearly always works, which is exactly why the men who do it are so rarely caught. It would have worked on me too, completely, if my father had not been a man who insured what he loved. And then, one night, I could not sleep, and I got up and I sat in my father's study in his chair, surrounded by his neat files and labeled boxes, just to feel close to him, and my eyes fell on the filing cabinet where he kept his insurance papers, all of it labeled in his careful hand, and something my father had said years ago floated up out of my memory. He had said, the day he showed me the coin collection when I was younger, "Neil, I've got all of this scheduled on the insurance. Every coin, the truck, your grandfather's watch, all appraised and listed because if there's ever a fire or a theft, I'm not going to argue with an insurance company about what I had. I'm going to hand them the list. The list." I sat in my father's chair at 2 in the morning and the word went through me like cold water. I remember every detail of that moment, because it was the moment the fog of grief lifted just enough for me to see. The house was dark and quiet, the deep quiet of a house where the person who made it a home is gone, and I had come to the study not to investigate anything. I want to be clear, but simply because it was the room that still smelled most like him, like his pipe tobacco and his old books and the particular order of the place, and sitting in his chair was the closest I could get to sitting with him. I was not playing detective. I was just a son missing his father at 2 in the morning, and it was in that unguarded, grieving state that my father's own voice came back to me, saying that thing he had said years before about the insurance, every coin, the truck, your grandfather's watch, all appraised and listed, and I sat bolt upright in his chair, because I understood, all at once, what it meant. If everything valuable was scheduled on the insurance, then somewhere in this house, in this very room, in one of these labeled files, was a complete, official, appraised list of everything my father owned. A list Craig had said did not exist. A list made not by Craig, not by me, but by an insurance company and a professional appraiser, dated and stamped and utterly beyond my brother's control. I turned on the desk lamp with a hand that was not quite steady, and I went to the filing cabinet to the drawer my careful father had labeled, in his own neat hand, "Insurance," and I opened it. My father, the man of records, had insured his valuables with what they call a scheduled personal property rider, an itemized list, professionally appraised, of every single valuable thing he owned, each with its description and its appraised value, filed with his insurance company and updated over the years. An exact dated third-party inventory of everything Craig had just told me did not exist. And Craig did not control it. Craig probably did not even know it was there. It was sitting in an insurance company's files and in my father's own cabinet waiting. I found it that same night in the labeled file, right where my careful father would have kept it. The scheduled property rider, page after page of it. The coin collection, appraised, itemized, with a value that made my hands shake because it was a fortune, many times more than the entire estate Craig claimed existed. The classic truck, scheduled, appraised. My grandfather's gold pocket watch, listed by name and description, with its appraised value. The valuable tools, all of it in black and white, dated, professionally appraised, insured, official. I sat in my father's chair, holding the proof that my brother was a liar and a thief, that the estate Craig swore was nearly worthless actually contained a small fortune in exactly the items my father loved most, the items that had all, I now understood with a sick certainty, quietly vanished into Craig's hands before the counting started. My father, from beyond the grave, through nothing more than his lifelong habit of insuring what he loved, had handed me the complete, undeniable list of everything his own son had stolen. I sat there for a long time in the lamplight, just reading it, page after page in the neat official type, and a strange thing happened to me. The rage came. Yes, the understanding of what Craig had done, but underneath the rage was something almost like awe, and almost like grief of a different kind, because I could feel my father in those pages. I could picture him years earlier, sitting down with the insurance agent, taking it seriously the way he took everything seriously, insisting that each coin be properly appraised, that the truck be documented, that the watch be listed by name, because to my father a thing worth having was a thing worth protecting properly. and cutting a corner was simply not in him. He had made that list not out of any suspicion of Craig, I am certain, but out of pure habit, the same habit that made him balance his checkbook to the penny, the same honesty that made him keep every receipt. And now that habit, that boring, unglamorous, lifelong carefulness that I had teased him about, was reaching across death itself to protect his estate and his memory and his grandson's inheritance from the one person in the world he probably never let himself believe would need protecting against his own son. I put my hand flat on those pages, the way my father used to put his hand on things he cared about, and I said out loud in the empty study, "Thank you, Dad," because he had. Even gone, even silent, he had protected us. One more time, the only way he ever knew how, by having kept the truth. Now here is the moment that matters, the moment this whole channel keeps coming back to. I had it. At 2 in the morning, in my father's chair, I held the thing that would expose Craig completely, and every furious, grieving bone in my body wanted to call him right then and scream that I knew, that I had the list, that he was a thief who robbed our dead father. I did not do it, because I understood, even through the rage, that a screaming phone call at 2 in the morning would do nothing but warn him, give him time to sell the coins, hide the money, get rid of the watch, concoct explanations, and turn me into the hysterical, grief-crazed brother making wild accusations. If I tipped my hand, Craig, who was clever, would have weeks to cover his tracks and spin a story. So I did the hardest thing a grieving, betrayed man can do. I put the insurance file in a safe place, and I said nothing to Craig, and I let my brother go on believing he had gotten away with it, while I quietly, carefully, did it the right way. The next morning, I took my father's insurance schedule to a lawyer, an estate lawyer, and I laid it on his desk next to the thin folder of numbers Craig had given the family, the folder claiming the estate was nearly worthless. And the lawyer looked at the two documents side by side. My father's official appraised inventory showing a small fortune in coins and a classic truck and an heirloom watch, and Craig's executor's accounting showing almost nothing. And the lawyer looked up at me, and he did not even have to say it. The gap between those two pieces of paper was the crime laid bare in numbers. The lawyer explained to me the thing that turned my father's careful habit into a weapon. He said, "An executor has a legal duty, a fiduciary duty, to account honestly for every asset of the estate. When there is an official, appraised, insured inventory showing valuable property that the executor's own accounting fails to include, that is not a discrepancy. That is evidence of conversion, of an executor stealing from the estate he was trusted to protect." And the lawyer said, tapping my father's insurance schedule, "Most families can never prove what was really in an estate, because a looting executor controls the records and does it before anyone counts. But your father," he said, "left an independent record the executor didn't control. This is exactly the proof that removes an executor and forces a full accounting. Your father protected you, Mr. Osborne, without either of you knowing it." The lawyer walked me through exactly why the insurance schedule was so powerful, and I am going to share it with you the way he shared it with me, because it is the kind of thing every family should understand, and almost none of us do until it is too late. He said the reason executors are able to loot estates is almost always the same, that the executor controls the flow of information, that in the chaos right after a death, the executor is the one who tells everyone else what was there and what it was worth. And if he simply understates it or omits things, who is to say otherwise? The family is grieving and trusting and has no independent way to know what the deceased actually owned. That, he said, is the gap that looting executors live in. But your father, he said, closed that gap without knowing it, because a scheduled property rider is not the family's word or the executor's word. It is a professionally appraised, independently documented dated inventory created by a third party, the insurance company, for the specific legal purpose of establishing exactly what someone owned and what it was worth. It is, he said, almost the perfect piece of evidence, because its whole reason for existing is to be an unimpeachable record of value. When I put that schedule next to Craig's accounting, the lawyer said, "We are not making an accusation. We are simply showing the court two numbers that cannot both be true and asking the executor to explain the difference. And there is no innocent explanation for a fortune in scheduled, appraised property vanishing from an estate during the exact weeks the executor had sole access to it. He looked at me and he said, "In 30 years, I have watched a lot of families lose everything to a bad executor because they couldn't prove what was taken. Your father made sure you could prove it. Most people don't leave their kids that gift. So we did it right, the lawful, patient, devastating way. We did not confront Craig in a kitchen. We went to the probate court, the court that oversees estates, and we petitioned for a formal accounting and, with the insurance schedule as evidence, challenged Craig's handling of the estate, laying out the gap between what our father's own appraised inventory proved he owned and what Craig had claimed existed. And the court did what courts do when an executor is confronted with an official inventory of assets he failed to account for. It demanded answers. Suddenly my brother Craig, who had been so comfortable, so sure his sad sigh and his thin folder had closed the matter, was required to explain, under the eye of the court, what had happened to a coin collection, a classic truck, an heirloom watch, and a list of valuable tools that our father had officially, provably owned, and that had vanished from the estate during the exact window when Craig, and only Craig, had access to them. There was no explanation that saved him. Craig tried, of course. He claimed the coins had been sold years ago, but the insurance schedule was recent and the appraisals current. He claimed the truck was worth far less, but it was appraised and scheduled. He claimed he did not know where the watch was, and I will tell you that was the moment in that courtroom when whatever was left of my brother in my heart finally died. Watching him lie about our grandfather's watch, the watch meant for my son, claiming he did not know while my father's own list sat on the table naming it. The truth was overwhelming and it was documented, and it had come from a source Craig could not touch or spin, our own careful father, reaching out of the grave with an insurance list to protect the estate his son was robbing. I sat in that probate courtroom, and I watched my brother try to lie his way past our father's list, and it was one of the saddest and most necessary hours of my life. Craig had hired a lawyer, and Craig had prepared, and Craig was, as he had always been, smooth and quick and plausible. But there is a thing that happens when a plausible man collides with a document that simply will not bend, and I watched it happen to my brother in real time. Every explanation he offered, the court would set beside my father's schedule, and the two would not fit. He said the coins had been sold years earlier to cover expenses, and the recent appraisal date on the schedule said otherwise. He said the truck had deteriorated and was nearly worthless, and the scheduled appraised value said otherwise. He grew less smooth as it went, a little sweat now, a little stammer, because it is one thing to lie to a grieving brother in a kitchen, and another thing entirely to lie to a court while your dead father's own honest paperwork sits on the table contradicting you line by line. And then came the watch. The judge asked about the pocket watch, listed right there on the schedule by description, and Craig said he did not know where it was, that perhaps our father had lost it or given it away. And I watched him say it. My brother, lying about our grandfather's watch, the watch our father had promised aloud to my son, and something in me went very cold and very still, because in that lie I finally saw the whole distance my brother had traveled from the boy I grew up with. He would lie about the war watch. He would lie about the thing 3 generations of Osborne men had carried. For money. That was who he had become. And the list, our father's patient, honest list, had dragged it into the light where the whole family could finally see it too. Craig was removed as executor. He was ordered to account for and return the assets he had taken, the coins, the proceeds of the truck, the money from the emptied accounts, the watch, and the estate, our father's real estate, the small fortune Craig had tried to make disappear, was finally properly inventoried and divided the way our father's will had actually intended, fairly, between his 2 sons, minus what Craig now owed back for what he had tried to steal. I did not gloat. I want you to know that, because by the end, there was no joy in it, only a deep, tired grief, because I had not just lost my father, I had lost my brother too, not to death, but to the truth of who he really was. When it was over, I did not say a cruel word to Craig. I did not have to. My father's list had said everything that needed saying, but I will tell you the one thing I did do, the only thing I truly wanted out of all of it. I got back my grandfather's gold pocket watch, the watch that had come down 3 generations, the watch my father always said would go to my son. Craig had to return it, and the day the lawyer placed it in my hand, that small, heavy gold thing warm from 3 generations of Osborne hands, I closed my fingers around it, and I went out to my car and I wept, because that watch was my father and my grandfather and everything Craig had tried to steal and slander, and it was home. My son wears it now on his wedding day and on his father's birthday, and someday it will go to his son, exactly as my father wanted, and my brother's greed did not get to end that chain. That, more than the money, was the victory. I gave the watch to my son on the evening it came back to me, and I want to tell you about that, because it is the moment that made the whole hard fight worth it. I did not make a big ceremony of it. I just called him over, my grown boy, and I put the watch in his hand and closed his fingers around it, the way the lawyer had done to me, and I told him whose it had been. His great-great-grandfather, who carried it through the war. His great-grandfather, who gave it to his grandfather on a wedding day. His grandfather, my father, who had held it up in the hospital the day he, my son, was born, and said, "This is his." And now his. My son is not a man who cries easily, but he did then, holding that small warm weight of gold and 100 years of his own family, and he said, "Dad, Grandpa really said it was mine when I was born." And I said, he said it more than once, son, in front of everybody, it was never in doubt, and I did not tell him that night. Everything his uncle had done, all the ugliness of the courtroom, the lies about this very watch. There will be time for the whole story someday. That night I just wanted him to feel the weight of where he came from, unbroken, delivered, home. My father wanted his grandson to have this watch. He is going to have it, and his son after him. Craig tried to break that chain for money, and he did not, and I would go through the whole ordeal again 10 times over just for the look on my son's face as his fingers closed around it. Here is the part I think about most now. My father slandered no one, and yet by that insurance list he told the truth about his whole life. Because Craig's lie was not only that the estate was worthless, Craig's lie was that our father was a failure, a man who worked 41 years and died with nothing, a careless man who left only debts. And that was the cruelest theft of all, worse than the coins, worse than the truck, the theft of who our father actually was. And my father's careful list, that dated, appraised, insured inventory, did not just prove Craig was a thief, it proved our father was exactly the man he had spent his whole life being, careful, successful, responsible, a man who provided, a man who tracked and protected everything he built. The same carefulness that Craig mocked and I once teased him about turned out to be the thing that defended my father's memory and my father's legacy from his own son. Someday all this careful paper is going to matter, Neil, and you'll be glad one of us kept it. He was right. It mattered more than he could ever have dreamed. Craig and I do not speak now, and I have made my peace with that as much as a man can. He is still my brother, and our father would not have wanted us at war, and if Craig ever came to me truly sorry, I would like to think I would find a way. But he has not, and I do not chase it, because a man who could rob his own dead father and lie about it in a courtroom, and lie about our grandfather's watch, is not a man I can pretend I did not see clearly finally at last. I mourn him in a way, the brother I thought I had, but I do not mourn the truth. The truth is the thing that set our father's memory right, and put the watch in my son's hand. And it came. All of it from nothing more than a careful man's habit of ensuring what he loved. The rest of the family knows now, of course, and that mattered more than I expected. Because in those first 2 weeks, Craig's version had spread, the sad story of poor Dad who died with nothing, and I had heard it repeated at the funeral reception by aunts and cousins, our father reduced, in death, to a man who worked his whole life for nothing. And when the truth came out in that courtroom, it did not just recover the money and the watch, it corrected the story. The family learned that our father had died exactly as he lived, careful and successful and providing, and that the tale of the worthless estate had been a lie told by the son who emptied it. An old aunt, who had shaken her head sadly about poor Leonard dying, Broke came to me afterward, embarrassed, and said she should have known better, that Leonard Osborne never did anything carelessly in his life. No, I told her. He didn't. Not even his own protection. And that was the moment I understood that my father, through that list, had done one last careful thing for all of us. He had made sure that the last word on his life would be the truth and not his son's lie. So, let me leave you with what my father taught me, without ever knowing he was teaching it. And then I will let you go. The people who would rob you, even your own blood, especially in the shattered days right after a death, they count on one thing above all. They count on you being too grief-stricken to count, too trusting to suspect, and too sure that the family records they control are the only records there are. So, be like my father. Be careful in the quiet, boring, unglamorous ways that no one thanks you for. Ensure what you love, appraise it, list it, leave a record of the truth in the hands of someone the schemer cannot control. A record that will still be standing and still be true long after you are gone and cannot speak for yourself. Because the greatest revenge my father ever took on the son who robbed him was one he never even knew he was setting up, decades early, with nothing but an insurance form and a lifetime of carefulness. Craig thought he controlled the only list that mattered. Our father had left a better one, an honest one, and it was waiting in a file, patient and exact, for the day it was needed. It was needed, and it did not miss a single coin. If this story meant something to you, tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there. And tell me honestly, has your family ever been torn apart by what happened after someone passed, and did the truth ever come out? I read every single comment, and I want to hear it. Take care of yourselves. Keep good records for the people you love, and I will see you in the next one.